Welcome, audiences. Today we have another installment of interviews with featured composers. This is in advance of our performances. Our next one is going to be on Saturday, April 17th at 7:30 p.m. If you'd like to join us for a short pre-concert at 7:15, please do that. And you are also invited for the post-concert discussion with audiences and composers as well. And that'll be immediately following the performance. But please check out our website for information on our next concert. Today we have composer, cellist, conductor, and professor of music at Haverford College. We have Heidi Jacob. Welcome, Heidi.
Oh, welcome. And thank you very much for this opportunity. It's great to have music being performed, even if it is live streamed, but it still is live in much respect. And there is still shows that there's so much that is going on. Music is live and well. It's live and well at Haverford College with so many of my wonderful students that are playing 10 chamber music groups, orchestras that are, of course, under 25 members, but also so much going on in the city. Philadelphia Orchestra is still playing. We've got Chamber Music Society and so much at Network. So very much appreciated all of the work and the details that go into making this actually work is more difficult in many respects than normal.
Indeed, indeed. And thank you for those acknowledgements to demonstrate really there is quite a lot of excellent music happening. Now, you've held many prestigious positions. You've had many acclaimed recordings, and you've appeared as a featured artist in many performances that have received widespread praise. So tell us a little bit how you fit all of these components as composer, cellist, conductor, and professor. How do these all fit together for you?
Well, first of all, I think that it's important to realize that they all do work together and they help each other out. Now, I did my training, Curtis Juilliard, as a cellist. I got into conducting through my teaching positions. And what I love about conducting is studying the scores. And prior to all of this, as a teenager, I studied cello and then I studied piano with actually Leonard Klein was his name. He was a professor of composition actually at Mills College, but he taught me not just piano, he taught me theory, counterpoint, which I loved, and I did composition with him as well. So I wrote some pieces. So I think that, and that is a very important part of my background as well, particularly the counterpoint, which still informs my compositional work. But I also think that one of the things is in my teaching, and of course I teach now at Haverford College, is that both conducting and teaching chamber music, all of that informs my writing, because that music that I study, when I look at a score, I'm looking how it's put together. That's what I love about conducting, right? And particularly when I'm teaching it, trying to impart that to my students. Why does the composer do this? And in chamber music, that I can ask that more directly and have them think about it on a different level. Well, look what's happening here in the accompaniment. Why does this person, he or she, change this? And that informs our what we're going to be, how we interpret the music. So always from the very beginning, I always did a lot, not conducting, that came later. So, and then on the other side, composition, I got my DMA at Temple University. I needed to recharge. My job at Haverford keeps me very busy. So the composition helps inform what I'm doing as a conductor. So I will say, well, I know as a composer, why did he or she do this? And I tell that to my students, and I'm thinking about that all the time. So.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting too, especially the way you described it, because like when we're composing things, I always sort of think of it as we're inside the piece. But if you're using your conductor ears, you're more objective, you're more outside of the piece. And so your music brings that wonderful balance between the two of those, that shifting back and forth.
Well, thank you. And I think that these are skills that I think are important for everybody. I think that one does not hinder the other. Although obviously I'm quite busy this year with teaching a little bit more due to the pandemic, and it's a little more stressful. So
Great. And I was wondering, so I want to talk a little bit more about the piece that we're featuring on this performance, Winter Light, which is for violin and piano. And in the program notes, you mentioned it's inspired by the Bergman 1962 film of the same title. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about sort of that as an inspiration and how that figures into the piece.
Okay, well, first of all, I think it's important to know that this piece started out actually as, when I first started writing it, as a piece for strings, violin solo, and percussion, just wind chimes and xylophone. I'm not sure why I started at that. Maybe it was for a call for scores or something. Then I realized that that wasn't all practical. And midway, I also started to write the violin and piano version. I also later wrote another version that is just wind chimes, strings, and violin solo. And that was performed by Claudio Scimone, I Solisti Venetti. So I had that wonderful opportunity. So there's 3 different versions of it. But back to your original question, I think Charlie and I, my husband and I, watch a lot of Bergman's films. And we are really amazed by how the music that he chooses, and I think he was married, one of his marriages was to a pianist, and I can't remember whom. And it's amazing how he uses classical music and how the music almost his use of it in the film transforms our experience of these pieces that actually we know quite well. Fanny and Alexander uses Schumann Piano Quintet, the second movement, which actually I happen to be teaching this semester to some students. And it changed my listening of this piece. There's some actually, I don't want to get too much detail maybe, but there's some very difficult, it goes from the minor to the major. The major feels like the tempo should change and be faster. And I've always for years felt that, oh, we need to play this faster. And I think some performers do. But when I heard it when I saw it in this particular film, it made sense then, because Schumann doesn't mark it to be faster. So it's really very interesting how he uses music. It's really brilliant, I think. Persona also uses a violin concerto by Bach, E major. So when it comes to this particular piece, we had seen the Winter Light, and when I started writing the piece, I don't think that I was really conscious of how it impacted my writing. And then midway through, I realized that maybe some of the themes of this, what it evokes, these sort of general feelings, were really probably part of what I was maybe feeling. And I think it's interesting because I'll quote what I think it's in my program notes, what Bergman did say, that he wanted with this film, the audience would understand and would leave the theater with a definite felt experience or suddenly acquired thought. So it's not about specifics, and I think that's very important. And then the other aspect about this particular film is that he doesn't use much music in it. So there's that flip side.
Yeah, there's the organ solo, the organ parts, and but I think you did mention that the music material in the violin is what begins and ends your piece, and that there's that scene of the church and that sort of plaintive solo violin, which sort of reminds me of that sermon at the beginning of the film.
Right.
And also, what I love, it's sort of the joining together of that experience of the film and also your piece is in that opening scene where Bergman shows like different perspectives of the church.
Right.
And so throughout your piece, it's like there's different perspectives on the melody as well.
Right, and that's actually, getting technical, I actually use a 12-tone row throughout this, not all of it, but from the very beginning, and it's actually based, not in the quote traditional sense, that, but I do use more repetition, but that's probably why it gets that feeling of different kind of views, but I hadn't thought about that. But I think that, a lot of, when it comes to writing music, we are influenced by so much that we don't really know. I know I'm probably influenced by all the music. I've been playing new music since I was in high school. I played in a youth orchestra that Actually, I remember hearing the Symphonic Metamorphosis when I was playing that when I was 14 and being thrilled. We did a music of Black composers actually back then. You know, I've conducted my wonderful colleagues, Kurt Cacioppo and Inger Arokos. I've conducted their works. I know all that informs me. I'm actually influenced right now by a piece by Richard Warnick that Charlie's been playing, one of his sonatas. I know that actually, Dick doesn't know this, but I'm started to write a piece that is influenced by that. That one's more known, but I think with this, it kind of came about without my knowledge until a little bit later. And that helped me continue to write the piece, being kind of aware of those themes. So
yeah, and to give ourselves time to allow those influences to work their way into something original.
Right. Yes, we don't always know how it comes about, but it's there. We're all so influenced by all of our music, and I'm also influenced by the written word. A lot of my music, my string quartet, is influenced by poetry of the Polish poet Milosz. I wrote a piece for piano that's influenced by Waiting for Godot. So that's kind of part. I love literature. I love poetry. So I think there's that natural inclination for me too.
And not to put too specific a gesture on it, but I was also thinking your violin line, which leaps upward, right? Is that sort of being the idea of the sermon, and you know, in the movie speaking to God and above, and you know, it's just I think the audiences are going to find a lot of rich metaphors and resonances in Winterlight.
I don't think that I necessarily thought it that way. There is the middle section, which is very plaintive, and that's kind of the despair. I think by then maybe I had already realized, or when I started to write that, maybe then I made this connection to these movies that we do watch. Very much integration of art is important to me. Yeah,
indeed. And as I'm thinking too, is that kind of influence, and to also thinking about Winterlight, and I was contemplating the title itself, that, you know, sort of winter is the metaphor for, you know, difficult time, you know, in that sense. And then, but light is, you know, bright, warm, and it mixes those. And I do think that maybe that's sort of a perfectly appropriate piece for right now.
Right.
And as we maybe emerge out of this pandemic, and I wanted to ask you, you know, what you've been doing during this time. You mentioned you're teaching and you're thinking on some new pieces, but to put this maybe into another context, you mentioned your work at Temple, where you got your doctorate. And I know that the piece that you did, your dissertation, was Mass for a Time of War, a Requiem Mass honoring the victims of the Iraqi conflict. And I'm wondering, you know, what have you been doing during the pandemic, and how might this influence you creatively?
Well, that's really interesting, and I'm sure that this is something that many of us are thinking about. Just in terms of what I've been doing, mostly trying to keep up with my teaching, because I do have more of it. I have had some performances. I feel very fortunate. Last summer, my string orchestra work, Many in One, which was conducted very wonderfully by Jim Freeman and the Chamber Orchestra First Editions. They premiered it, but it was performed by the Moravian Philharmonic Orchestra, and all masked. And so I had that opportunity last August. Mimi Steelman has been playing some of my works, a suite for flute. She did that online. So, and in fact, that was in our backyard. That was filmed in our backyard. And then I do have coming up in the Czech Mixed Chamber Choir. We'll be recording a work of mine, Lilacs, which I wrote for a choir up in Reading. So in terms of what else I've been doing, I actually wrote a very short piece for the flute on choir at Bryn Mawr, and that's all I had time for in January when I wasn't teaching. And I think this is actually, maybe this is important to say, this is, I'm very touched. These are the students that actually, I can't accept all the flutists in orchestra. If you have 10 or 12, it's impossible. But they still want to play. And I was actually very touched. They're still playing their flutes. They still want to play. And I just was very touched by that and wanted to write a piece for them. And it's led by Becky Simon, who does a fine job. I guess I'm touched by the fact how important music is to us now on all levels, playing. So that's what I've written. In terms of how it's the piece is written so that it can be done outdoors, and it's also written that it could be done easily if you're going to be doing it on a Zoom situation, if you had to make a multi-track recording. So I think that it does make you think differently. And I've been trying to figure out ways to incorporate maybe in the future some of these aspects of when you think of which is the string quartet by Elliott Carter, where there's one, they're all in different corners. I mean, that kind of idea, I'm not sure. But I think maybe just the whole idea of coming together again also is something that is very, very important. I want to write a choral work for our new conductor at Haverford College. He and I are looking at that night. Nate Zullinger, he is new choral director there. So I guess that's sort of a roundabout way, but.
Well, I think that's a great idea to end on, is the thought of being able to come together again, right. Make music together again, and how many people have been using music to sustain themselves over this difficult time. So I thank you very much for joining us today on this interview. And we encourage audiences to please join us on April 17th at 7:30 p.m. so you can hear Heidi Jacob, her Winter Light for violin and piano. Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you so much, and a pleasure to speak with you. And I'm looking forward to the performance. Wonderful, wonderful job with Hirono and Charlie.
Thanks again.
Take care.